There's no better time than winter to curl up with a book and a cup of something hot and delicious and stare out at the pouring rain and wish it was snow. We're all super busy during the winter season, and I think it's really good to decide to take some time for yourself, especially when we're so screensy, Netflix, social media. It's good to pick up a book, get sucked in, slurp yourself into a tiny little page world. That came out weird. It's especially comforting to do something nice for yourself once you've been out in the pathetic drizzle with the dog and every fibre of your being is now coated in that, including your soul. And every fibre of your dog's being, which has a lot more fibres, is also drenched. She's like rubbing herself enthusiastically on the sofa and you're just looking over there being like, I'm gonna have to deal with that later. So here are some things that you can be reading while you're waiting for those Christmas cranberry white chocolate cookies you're baking in the oven. Or more likely, while you're microwaving that fruitcake from last year that's been in the cupboard for 12 months. Let's just get started, because we're running out of time here. It's getting fucking dark outside, because guess what? It's starting to be winter. Winter in Scotland means 4 hours of rain and 16 hours of darkness. Scotland is different. You've just got 20 hours now. I've got 5 books to recommend to you for this winter. 3 of them are pretty well known. You'll probably have heard of them even if you haven't read them yourself. And 2 of them a bit more obscure, a little more wild card, which I'm hoping I might be able to introduce you to something new that you've never read before. So my first book to recommend for the winter season is Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. Northern Lights is a fantasy story set in the Great White North with armoured polar bears and magic and just this huge richness and depth. Philip Pullman will gently enchant you before he rips your heart out and eats it with cold eyes. There are moving characters. If you decide to continue and read the rest of the series, really powerful themes buried in fascinating physics. My second recommendation are the stories of Sherlock Holmes. In the last decade or so, Sherlock Holmes has had a virtual renaissance in pop culture. There have been movies, there have been 2 separate TV shows. A quick aside here to say that if you're not watching Elementary already, you should be, because it's just so great and it builds on all the great things about Sherlock but takes them further, and Lucy Liu is just so great in everything and I just want to be her friend and have all her clothes. Apart from the obvious atmospheric delight of the foggy, cobblestoned 1890s London, the prose is incredibly engaging and readable today. Older texts can tend to be a bit daunting, I find, for a lot of people. Our language has obviously evolved a lot since then. Sometimes means we have to put in a bit of extra work to sort of decode what it means for our modern minds and our modern language. But I never find Holmes stories to be very hard work. It definitely offers some insight into times gone by, but it's never difficult. Now obviously there are lots of places where you can start with Holmes. For purposes of winter recommendations, I'm going to recommend the stories because I think it's really great to have something short like that and self-contained where you can pick it up and read for an hour or 2 and be finished with it, especially when we're all super busy and jetting around like jet setters. I spend a lot of time at home with my dog, who hates me. We've got shit to do. Sometimes it's nice to have short little stories that you can just pick up or put down and you don't have to commit to a massive fantasy thing, maybe like Northern Lights. My next recommendation is American Gods by Neil Gaiman? What happened there? I know who it's by. This is a really rich, winding story about an ex-con called Shadow, who's in mourning about his wife and who gets tangled up with this mysterious Mr. Wednesday character, and they journey across America encountering all these old gods who are trying to make life for themselves in the new world. It gives us a lot of fascinating insights into all the unique beliefs and traditions that America's many immigrants have brought over with them, executed with this sort of perfect down-to-earthiness. Shadow as a main character is really gentle and intriguing and sympathetic, and Mr. Wednesday is at times hilarious and at times terrifying. The story builds in a really kind of slow burn up to a very epic conclusion. The language itself is beautiful, it's really vivid, it's really textured. In particular for winter recommendation, the parts where Shadow is staying at this really surreal, snowy little town called Lakeside are a total highlight. It's completely the kind of book that you can just sort of sink into and get lost in. So those are my bigger, more popular suggestions. Now I'm going to move on to my slightly more obscure ones. The first of which is Advent by James Treadwell. Now we're going slightly more off the beaten track. Advent is a really surreal, subtle fantasy. It follows 15th century sorcerer Johannes Faust in his search for immortality, alongside 15-year-old present-day Gavin, who's trying to sort of unravel the strange things that have been following him around for his entire life. I actually picked this up around the winter season one year because I thought that Advent meant it's something to do with Christmas. It actually doesn't, but it still works really well as a nice snowy wintry read. Similarly to American Gods, this isn't super action based, especially for a fantasy. It's quite slow burn, it's still wonderfully rich and textured, and the language is lovely. The first sentence, for example, is just a perfect start to a fantasy book that you want to read in winter. On a wild night in deep winter in the year 1537, a dog scratched, and then she was killed. On a wild night in deep winter in the year 1537, the greatest magus in the world gathered together and dismissed his household servants, wrapped himself in his travelling cloak, took his staff in one hand and in the other a small wooden box sealed with pitch and clasped with silver, and stepped out into the whirling sleet, bound for the harbour, and so he expected immortality. How good is that for a first sentence for a book? It is the first of a series though, so if you're looking for something with lots of answers that is all neatly wrapped up like a bow, probably don't go for this. But if you're happy to be carried along on a sort of current of mystery and intrigue and fantasy, definitely give it a go. So my final recommendation is an indie book, and it's The Illuminated Heart by Thea Van Diepen. Now we're thoroughly off the beaten track, we're probably quite deep in the woods, night is falling, don't know what's going on, don't know if we're going to survive it. I'm actually going to be doing a full review of this sometime for Christmas as well, so keep an eye out for that, but for now I'll just give you a quick overview. So this is a really lovely retelling of an Icelandic fable. It has a really simple plot, but it's told with such heart and such warmth. The main character, Dagny, I hope I'm pronouncing that right because it has an accent and I'm not sure. Dagny's little brother has died and come back to haunt her family farm as a draugr, which is something you may have heard of elsewhere in popular culture. Norse zombie type thing. They show up in Skyrim, I think, at some point. But basically, the draugr is killing all their crops and driving all their animals mad, and in desperation, Dagny pleads for a sign from God. And then a polar bear shows up at their door and says that he can fix things if Dagny goes with him. In that respect, it's a little Beauty and the Beast, maybe specifically Robin McKinley's Beauty and the Beast retelling, Beauty, which I think is fantastic, emphasises this choice of this young girl to leave her family for the good of that family. Anyway, this is just a really lovely book. Nothing says winter like a fairy tale about a talking polar bear. It's set in this beautiful sort of stark Icelandic winter landscape. Really moving, uplifting themes about faith, which totally won me over. And at 30,000 words roundabout, it's really short. I read it in one sitting. You can easily read it in an afternoon and you won't be sorry that you did. So those are my recommendations. I'm going to try and reread some of these over winter myself. I'm also looking for some new things to put in my brain meat over this winter, so if you have any recommendations, let me know. I definitely made the mistake of putting toffee cream on Elfie's toy to try and distract her while I was filming this, and now it's made her super hyper. That's it from me, guys. Don't forget to subscribe because it's kind of polite, really. State Flux is still available on Amazon and elsewhere. You can check it out below. I'm often loitering around on Instagram, Tumblr and Twitter, so you can find me on there as well if you haven't had enough of my awful chat. Oh, gee, you just lick yourself on top of me. That worked. What an asshole. You're gonna be the death of me. Oh my god, I'll kill you. Hi there. That was pretty good. That wasn't bad. So I can't actually see my own face while I'm filming this, which is probably helpful, I think, at this point, because I'm not a fan of this right now. I will kill your tiny dog face.